Beat to the Fire with the Black Knight of Talk Radio, James Atayanchik, is the technical production of IPS Media Works and aired on the Jancic Radio network of stations. The views expressed in the following show are of the host, the guest, and the callers, and not necessarily the views of Interstreams Radio, IPS Media Works, the Jancic Radio Network, nor its advertisers and affiliates. The content of the following show, its accuracy, authenticity, and the ramifications of the use or application of said content is the responsibility of those speaking and listening, not the broadcast medium.
One thing I've learned, if you don't hold their feet to the fire, everybody gets burned.
Hold on. Before you start waving around that freedom of speech thing, when you're in a crowded movie theater and you scream fire, you better be able to smell smoke. If you come on this radio show and you start saying incandescent things like that, you better have more behind you, pal, than just your thumb. I've been listening to talk radio for years, and one thing I just can't stand is when the host has to, push his way onto people, beat the callers into his way of thinking, extending his ego. Or when the callers call in and say something so outrageous, and the host lets it go unchallenged. The sign you're on the road to truth is the lack of contradiction. You want to find truth, you just don't simply believe somebody because of their authority or their degree, or you listen to what they say, you test it against reality, and you hold their feet to the fire. Dreams of My Real Father. You may have heard about that documentary that has been made trying to explain the real father of Barack Obama. I watched the video. There's a lot of incriminating evidence of Barack Obama's versus his constructed, publicly presented life. However, one thing I don't like about the video is that the people making it are coming from an anti-communist, pro-capitalist perspective, and so the focus is on his communist ideals, sort of like in a McCarthyian witch hunt way, rather than look at some of the principles as not being bad, not necessarily embracing communism. But capitalism is no walk in the park either. There's good parts in it and bad parts. It's not that there's somebody doing an independent investigation to try and find out. It's coming in from the anti-communist perspective and showing how his communist roots and his communist friends and his communist stuff and blah, 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 blah. Bad choice, I think. Anytime you come in with an axe, you will take away from the usability of the message, because now everybody has to weigh everything through this anti-communist mask, a filter. So, but again, most people do things out of anti-reason. They're against this, so then they do this, rather than just let's just see what the evidence is and let it be. Very rare to find. So this case, no exception. Another problem I have with it is the credibility, I think, of it. I shouldn't say the credibility. I mean the energy from it, the attitude of it. It has somebody pretending to be Barack Obama narrating his life, and I think that was a bad choice because, again, it comes in with this axe So, I mean, if you can, obviously people are adult, can see that, look past it, and get real data on there. But really, it's a anti-Obama video, anti-communism, and therefore will help people to vote for Romney, which is no walk in the park either. Likening, in fact, let me go in, likening to something that Webster Tarpley said I like, is that Romney is the death by chainsaw because basically the conservative wing has no problem coming in and hacking what they think might be some type of social redistribution programs, which they call wealth, which should be, social helping other people, even if it is done poorly. The concept is not necessarily bad. They got no problem coming in and hacking it with a saw. The liberals and the conservative of the coin tend to try and mask that underneath things. So Tarpley come up with Obama being death by 1,000 cuts and Romney being death by a chainsaw. And I maintain that if you are afraid of what Obama may do, i.e. communism, thus this movie, Dreams of My Real Father, who was a communist, you will go to Romney and get death by chainsaw. Or people who look at Romney and go, oh my gosh, I couldn't stand Bush, I don't need another Bush, and I'm going to vote for Obama and get death by 1,000 cuts. Both support the bankers, both support wars, both support the torture, etc. And so it's death from both of them. Don't get caught into the fear trap. Oh, I don't like Romney, but I can't stand Obama, so I'll vote for Romney. I want everybody to vote for a third party in protest. Pick the Green Party. I mean, let's face it, you could throw a dart at the list of people running and nobody could do worse. Because first off, the Congress is made up of Republicans and Democrats who aren't going to play with a third party. Thus, you can have a gridlock anyway. So, third party protest vote is, I think, the answer. Either nobody votes or everyone votes for a third party. That would be the answer to me. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to motivate people to do either. I don't think both would be a good idea. But either, I myself will vote for the third party as a protest vote. And don't get caught into the fear, the Bush, because, I was talking with someone who was a pro-Obama. Oh, I don't want another year. I don't want another 4 years of a Bush. And I explained to this person how Obama actually did everything Bush did and more than Bush did, than Bush would have liked to have done. More wars, way more bailouts, 10 times the trillion bailout that he did. Torture still fine, Guantanamo still up there, etc. There's still troops and missionaries. Well, it's missionaries for oppression, mercenaries in the Mideast. They're still killing families and children. We're now expanding this to Pakistan, etc. This is all under the Nobel Peace-winning president, the liberal, the Democrat, the same as it ever was, as the talking heads would say. And that's why we need to do different. Please don't fall in the fear trap of left, right. Well, the third party can't win. Yes, they can if you vote for them. It's not a racehorse that they're not physically able to do. It's will people actually get out of the fear of the left-right paradigm and go vote for a third. And so beware of Dreams of My Real Father, because ultimately it drives people into Romney's arms. And I even heard Alex Jones talking about, well, I hate to vote for Romney, but Obama's just so bad. And I don't know, maybe don't fall for the left-right paradigm. Go step out of the box. And make a protest vote. The main way that you can fight the oppression by the fascist system is to oppose GMO. That is, I've said it before, I'll say it again in context with what I just said. The real vote is going on in California, Proposition 37, the mandatory labeling of GMOs on all foods. That is the real tip of the spear fighting fascism Fascism being defined as a partnership between the private sector and the public sector, using the private sector's direction and the public sector's legal muscle to force you to do it. And in this case, we have all the precedents in the world for labeling. You label it from China. You label it if it contains wheat or soy products for allergic or peanuts. There's all these reasons to label. You throw in the GMO label. It's going to raise prices. What? To simply have the person you're buying from disclose if their source is GMO or not, and you pass that information along. That is not going to be a $400 a year grocery bill increase and all the other nonsense Monsanto says. What it will be, though, is the end of Monsanto's GMO, because once companies who are basically heartless and soulless and are driven by profit, well, they're buying GMO because it's cheaper, because it's more plentiful. It's at least cheaper because it's more plentiful. You will, if they have to now label their products and create two levels, one for California, one for the rest of the world, or one for several states, one for not, they will just go, you know what, I could just make GMO, non-GMO, and say, does not contain GMO, or depending what the law is, they don't have to say anything. If it's GMO, then they do. And they'll just go to the GMO. And that's what Monsanto worries about, is that the simple greed and laziness of the companies, which allowed us to have GMO without labeling, will simply not have GMO, so they don't have to worry about labeling. Now, I'm not saying it has to. I mean, look at this is not tyrannical by the label people to stamp out GMO, the right to have GMO or what have you. Look at the organic communities who have been paying a higher price for their organic food because of the less farmers grow organic. It takes more effort to grow organic. It takes a less of a marketing, therefore there's less profit margin with lower sales because less people are dedicated to it, and yet they're very faithful to it, and there's a thriving, growing organic market. Well, if GMOs are so great, if the people want the GMO, they'll support the GMOs in the labels, and they will have GMO will flourish, just like organic has flourished. So that's all we're saying. It's a legal, regular legal level playing field. We want to know what's in it. If you can have things like kosher, deciding if the product is pure enough for religious use, we can have GMOs. We can decide if GMO on our own is good enough for our use, and so forth. So support, please, California people, please vote for Proposition 37. Yes, everybody else around the nation, write your friends in California, right, and keep involved. And as soon as California passes that, jump on our people. Because if nothing else, I mean, just because California might be labeled, it doesn't necessarily mean that all the companies will jump to GMO, probably, or eventually, but we need to jump on the ball as well. So that is the real thing this year in the election. The only thing that matters in the ballots, in my opinion, would be if a large showing of people voted for a third party or didn't vote, which is, who knows? That's got to be someone organized. I mean, there's no way you can do it. Ron Paul gets pushed off the stage, and he's trying to play within the system. Well, who's going to get pushed off the stage trying to be outside the system? I noticed the Green Party candidate was arrested trying to protest not being involved in the debates. So there you go. That shows you right there. But Prop 17, boom. Vote it, and then put the feet to the fire on the courts if they challenge it. Stick behind it. Constitutional amendment, which is ridiculous. But whatever it takes to have this done. All right, I've mentioned this before. The FEMA camps, the bullets, and the mass. There's a new story out that I got an email about memos on mass fatalities. And again, I'd like to state this. I wanted to state this for the YouTube record for those watching on YouTube. But for the record, the reason why you have the FEMA camps and you have the bullets and you have the warning mass fatalities is the system is going to crash because of the monetary pyramid that have been built over the years. It got so high and so far away that there's no way it could not crash. It's just a matter of when. And when it does crash, the systems around it will crash. People will be affected. There will be riots, lack of food. All these things will happen because the system is so efficient, quote unquote, that there's only like 2 or 3 days worth of product in the stores. And so combine a bank holiday, you can't get the money out of the bank. The stores can't get shipment because they can't pay because there is all the digital money will be gone. And again, stick around for Lionel Parkinson. All these things will happen. You will need to have order. And what the government is trying to do by localizing, militarizing the local police and putting up these camps and whatnot is to have some kind of regional order until they get through on the other side, whether it be a redefined dollar or a different currency or what have you, to try and work on this. They want to hold things together in the process. And the FEMA camps are so small compared to the population that they're not there to re-educate us. Granted, writings are being said. This is all propaganda. It is there to keep people either to coerce people who they need to help run the system. We'll take care of your family and feed them and keep them in these camps, which are protected, or they will threaten people by taking their family and put them into camps. And that's basically what they're for. Us, who aren't necessary to the system, are on our own out here. Thus, the increase in people buying bullets, food, whatnot. I would, again, caution people who are storing gold to listen to Lionel Parkinson's show after less to understand that even gold isn't safe. This is the real aspect of it. People say, well, it's been planned from the beginning. Look at the writings of some of the Masons and all this stuff. Well, a lot of those are megalomaniacs. And a lot of those people say, man, there's people out there who say all kinds of things. If you remember the prophet Yahweh talking about the spaceships coming, everything from that to Manson, you have people who have all these megalomaniac dreams. They write them down, and they die. And they move on, and that's it, And so what happens is there is a disservice being perpetrated, perhaps innocently, meaning that they believe this and therefore aren't propagandizing, or it is being done with a purpose to assist the system. But to give the impression that the system is this omnipotent, 50 years ahead of us in technology, has all these secret weapons, has all these things behind it, lets us feel very oppressed and impotent, so we don't do anything, or B, gives us a perverted sense of security, knowing that, well, if nothing else, at least we'll be in the FEMA camps getting food when there's nothing else available. You actually get like a Stockholm syndrome where your oppressor is so overpowering and powerful that you actually become dependent on the oppressor. Well, at least I got a place to sleep in Foursquare because the oppressor has me in his jail, whereas the people out on the street are like dogs fighting to eat. Well, that's just the problem with that is it's not true. They're not. The people running this system are corrupt, inept, and don't have tremendous technical superiority. They don't have the omnipresence and the planned knowledge of imploding the system. On the contrary, they have been so inept and greedy and short-sighted that they've caused this bubble to get so huge. They have no way of knowing how to deal with it. All they know, it's going to crash, and they're trying to prepare to keep semblance of order and hope that something will work out in the future. Right now, they're working on now. How are we going to get through today? And we'll push the problems forward till tomorrow. And that's how we got into this mess. So when it does collapse, they're grasping for straws. Don't feel secure in knowing that your oppressor is, that's why these stories about jump room to Mars and aliens coming down to help us and all these, the New Age going into a New Age of Enlightenment, all those things have the result of keeping people acquiescent, inactive, and give a false hope. If aliens benign aliens, at least, I hope, do come to help us, or Jesus does return, or we ascend in a new age of enlightenment, that's just wonderful. No problems, okay? But if it doesn't happen, if we've been sitting on our laurels, you're going to have a mass extinction based on people being in a paradigm of unreality. And then when the cosmic 2x4, thank you, Dr. Rita, for that term, does hit you across the brow, it will knock you on your back. And so that's why the search for truth, the search for reality, the search for testing things, comparing with the real world is so important, because reality will win. Reality is real. Okay, until we ascend in our consciousness beyond reality to the mechanism that creates reality, which is people have alluded to in things like The Secret, until we actually ascend that high to be able to recreate reality on demand, we are subject to it. And it's best to know your limits. When you're on a ship, and if you can't fly that ship, you need to know that ship inside and out, left and right, and how to use it and what to do with it. And that's what we have to do now. We have to get real, find reality, deal with it, and then when the time does come for an ascension, if it does happen in these flesh, we at least know what's real to deal with it. And so, what we know what isn't real is the money that we're using to buy things, the prices that we have, and the political system and the propaganda system that's in place. There are some very important things to realize, that radio and TV is a propaganda tool, and those who do the best are usually in league with those who are pulling the strings. Otherwise, they don't do the best. They have a trouble surviving. So that's actually one of the benefits I like about what I'm doing, is that I don't depend on anybody. The people do send help and support and money, which is great because it does help. But I'm working and supporting most of it myself. So as long as I can do this, I will. And I don't have to worry about someone telling me what to say. Now, so far to date, no one's come in there with a gun and said, hey, you better do this. And I don't want to do it. And I won't do it, as best as I can see. And I think what some people do is they agree to do it, and then they shoot themselves in the foot in hoping that you can see the shooting in the foot and realize that person has been compromised. That's probably the best they can do, other than simply refuse. And that's why I think you see a lot of people will come out with stuff, then all of a sudden they'll do this weird turn, and you go, what happened? Why are they being goofy? Well, they got talked to, and they were told. In the case of Ross Perot, he got a talking to about his daughters, and he backed off. Other people say dumb things, and they get pushed out, or they, because that's their way of discrediting what they said before that was true. Like watching the movie The Matrix, and then watching Matrix 2 and 3, which totally discredits 1. What we have to do is go back to 1 and get rid of the 2 and 3. And a lot of people have said a lot of things that later discredit themselves. We got to go back to those original pieces and realize that they're human and prone to failure, or at least open to failure, and understand, but then still glean the goodies that you can out of it. Don't throw the baby out the bathwater. In other words, so it's very important, I think, that and that's why Douglas Dietrich's work is so important, because he brings to the table a lot of information that when you allow it to form the paradigm he's talking about and let it settle on reality, it fits better than what we are being taught. The 50-year superior, jump room to Mars, working with aliens, all these things make it sound so, oh, man, there's no way we can ever beat them. Well, remember, the people who are working in the government are our people, too. If people actually wake up to humanity versus the fascist corporate, whatever you want to call it, oppressive system, there's very little of them, and there's a whole lot of us. So that's the thing. And that's why I think some people are doing a disingenuous service to the people in large, because by focusing on certain acts and certain alleged powers, it actually gives the powers that be more credit than they deserve. They're really just a inbred, degenerate, corrupt dissolving, disintegrating, disgusting group of people. They're short-term, virus, money-grubbing scum that don't have. I mean, they even though they may sit in a chair of a certain power, they are so ignorantly corrupt, stupefied to actually realize how they could run things into, take things over in a true oppressive area. So keep that picture of them. Look at what happened in the past. All the great powerful civilizations just disintegrated. You might say that Rome lost eventually in wars, but really they disintegrated in their power to be in a situation to lose. And it seems to be the case all along. Disintegration sets in. And I'm not saying the power was even right to begin with, but that's one of the problems with power and living in the ego is that you get diluted. And when you become out of touch with reality, I don't care how powerful you are, that's when you lose your power. You got to be real. Get real, be real. Keep checking yourself for your connection with reality. And beware of people, whether it be religious, whether it be political, spiritual, scientific, who have you step out of the reality into the fantasy. Because when you step on that ground, when the cloud goes away and there's nothing there, you go down. The reality of gravity kicks in and you're done. So one thing I want to say briefly, too, at this point is we also tendency to find truth in a quantitative, solid manifestation. And because truth, with a capital T, is something we have to learn, it is beyond us. And it manifests itself in certain things. For example, if you don't know gravity exists, obviously it affects you, and you're standing on the ground because there's gravity. But if you don't realize that gravity is keeping you on the ground, you just take it for granted you're on the ground. And apples fall from the sky. You don't know why they are. You take advantage of the principles of gravity, but you don't know it. So that's why the person thinks that I can just fly like a bird and just jump in the air and go on the ground. You realize that the bird is actually circumventing gravity using the physical lift, mathematical lift situations. Like, for example, penguins don't fly, they got wings. Ostriches don't fly, they have wings because they don't fit the physical requirements needed to have the lift to rise. And once you learn that, you can now use it and manipulate it because you're aware of it and familiar with it. And even in the case of gravity, they still don't know what makes gravity. There's a theory, there's a graviton, just like there's a photon and an electron, etc. I think there's a graviton. That's all a theory. They have, gravity may not even have a particle, but it's simply a relationship in a space-time as opposed to an actual force, quote-unquote, to be circumvented. And all that is irrelevant, but the point I'm talking about is that truth, as it comes into our understanding, manifests itself in little bits and pieces. The apple falling from the tree, you're not being able to fly like a bird. As you put these pieces together, you form a bigger structure which points to the reality of the truth principle being taught. And it's very rare. In fact, I can't think of anything off the top of my head where one particular viewpoint had all the pieces. They have some of the pieces. Some of the people will come up with theories and principles and beliefs that part of it is actual real truth, and part of it other one. When you put them all together, you can do it. That's why when you look at all the religions of the world and how incompatible the details are, if you pull back to some of the common teachings, which is loving, helping one another, or whatever, that's the real principle that they are giving through that does coalesce together for this bigger principle that they have got pieces of and created their own, their own deviation from it, their own kind of like cancer off to the side of it. Because if you follow partial truths and the false that's mixed in it, you get the extremes like the fundamentalists of all different types, be it Christian, be it Muslim, be it the fundamentalist, atheists even. All those people have a very destructive aspect of what they're doing. They actually go against the main principles of what they claim to stand for anyway. So I would say that myths, paradigms, and scenarios are the conveyors of the truth principles, and as the truth enters reality, it enters in little points that you find over here, over there, and you say, well, this is over here, it's over there, how's their relationship? Well, by finding out those things, you actually can reconstruct the geometric shape of the truth principle, which points to the actual center of its shape. Look at it like some type of a octagon, a 3D octagon, and when you measure all the angles, it points to a center. Well, when you're looking at truth when it first manifests, you get these points over here, over there, but then they start to show a pattern, and then when you follow the pattern, you recognize the pattern, and then you can actually trace back all the angles to find the center. And that's kind of the analogy. It's hard to talk about truth because we have a goofy way of it. I mean, since we started printing books, you can think that the one book is an exact copy of the other. Before, it used to be more subjective. Truth used to be sent through stories. And those stories could have different characters. I mean, look at all the myths and the gods. They all have different characters, different scenarios even, different stories even, but they still have the same principles carried. Aesop's fables. Oh, this is how truth was conveyed. But we got into a legalistic society that makes truth a legal function as opposed to a more of a philosophical function, and you can twist the legal areas, and that's why you lose the baby with the legal bathwater. It reminds me of Jesus saying, "You lawyers, you hypocrites," and all this stuff. You twist everything around to get out of things, and you destroy what the principle is that's being taught by those quote laws, unquote. And so therefore it ends up destroying it. So that's what we have to do, I think. I mean, the whole thing, a search for truth, is actually work. Your mind has to exercise. It kind of has to think differently and twist from another different angle. And it's usually hard to do. Most people are like, look, just tell me. Just tell me what it is. But then if you do, even if the person does articulate things accurately, over time it can be distorted, manipulated, and used, and then it gets lost anyway. So people have to know, have a working knowledge in the principle in order to live it, use it, and pass it along. And it takes a lot of work for that. Most people would rather just advocate that to someone else because what they're doing, whether it be a long day at work or playing, don't want to work, or whatever it is, takes too much away. And I think that's... I would like to have saved the audio from the video I did earlier to see what I did. Comparison, you can pay. Was the first one better or the second one? I don't know. But there's what it is. That's my comments for this time. We have Less Visible coming up with his commentary, and then please stay tuned for Lionel Parkinson. He's the author of the book, The Holy Virus, holyvirus.net, which really puts the feet to the fire to the blood sacrifice and the blood rituals of the Old Testament, tracing them to come from Babylon, actually, and not from the scriptures precursing the exile to Babylon, which don't exist. There isn't any to compare, unfortunately. And using that principle that he taught opens the eyes and minds to the original principles, and realize that Jesus was actually upholding the original principles and did not go for the blood sacrifice, which, of course, later on those same people used him as an example of. Now, that's the book he did. But what he's going to be talking about today is the idea that why is the bank's going to crash, and why are things like gold and silver not safe, that the prices of gold and silver are actually artificially high. It's not driven by inflation. Inflation is kept to a minimum because the markets are not being flooded with money. The money that's being created is going into the bank to shore up their losses. It's not going out on the street. That's where inflation comes from. If the government handed everybody a check for $100,000, you would see inflation. But because the money is going to the bank to be put back where they lost money, it doesn't hit the street, thus the inflation is not there. And it artificially props up the real money that used to be there with now this phony money that's been just created out of thin air. And then when all that collapses, well, all that'll be left of value, the dollar of silver and the value of silver and gold will collapse down along with the stock market because they're being propped up with unreal money. And the real money, the dollar that is left, the physical printed money, will be the way. Now, stay tuned for that, because if you don't believe that, you don't think that's true, listen to the logic behind it, and then, make the choice at the end of the show. So onward to less visible, and then on to Lionel Parkinson about the coming collapse and how gold and silver is not a safe haven in that. Beat the fire. We'll be right back.
I'm James Arthur Yanchik, the Black Knight of talk radio and creator and host of Feet to the Fire. Have you ever noticed the high volume of commercials on most talk shows? It is to the point that it seems like topics are the bait and the guests are the fillers to sell products. I've made a conscious decision to keep disruptions to a minimum and provide more uninterrupted time for the real reason you've tuned in. You hear guests with more time to make their points, allowing me and listeners to intuitively and intelligently formulate questions by having less interruptions to break the stream of consciousness. Feet to the Fire may be free to listen to, but it's not free to provide. We rely heavily on donations to offset the expenses of producing the show. If you like what we are doing and enjoy the show, why not consider donating via PayPal or a major credit card from our website, feet2fire.com. Or write us at Feet to the Fire, P.O. Box 511, Minooka, Illinois, 60447. Thank you.
If you have internet access, point your browser to www.feet2fire.com. That's www.feet2fire.com. And check the left of the screen for the How to Participate text and click. You can then choose Direct Chat with James or join the official group chat room. You can send email to James at f2f@innersights.com. And now, live from Chicago, here is the Black Knight of Talk Radio, James Arthur Yancik.
All right, we are back, and it's this series of recordings that I'm putting out until we can nail down how we're going to do it on a weekly basis. Kind of pops up here and there. And I was driving the other day, and I was thinking of Lional Parkinson, Lionel from the many shows we've done on the Holy Virus, which, believe me, if you are a Christian, you must read this book. Now, you could not agree with it, but you must read this book. And theholyvirus.net is the webpage. They have a special deal for Feet to Fire listeners. You can check it out on the webpage to get it at a very reasonable cost. Hardcover book, really well done. Done a lot of research on that. And he's been on the show many times on that topic, even bleeding off onto the legality of Babylon and how it's passed on to us, the contracts and how they trap us and so forth. That philosophy goes back to Babylon, which also, corrupted the ancient scriptures with the Babylonian theology, and it's the gist of his book. But Lionel also has talked to me, off air about the monetary situation to the point where I've had him on a couple times talking about it briefly. But I called him up and asked him if he would be willing to really go from, like, say, A to B to Z on this topic. The topic being the real crash that's coming, which it would be the deflation of the dollar and thus the crashing of gold and silver and other commodities in that area, which is against what is being talked about a lot on the radio everywhere. Gold and silver being pushed and pushed. I myself even to the point thinking about buying some silver coins just to have for some kind of value. And it reminded me, well, wait a minute. That's right. Lionel was warning about trusting in gold and silver, in that the actual real thing to have in the crash time is the physical dollar in your hand, not the one in the bank, not the one in some kind of stocks or some kind of fictional paperwork, but the actual dollars in your hands, because legal tender will take precedence over digital money, to the point even as to be more valuable than gold in that time, which is hard to wrap my head around. I'm like, but over through all history, gold has been like the fall back on type thing. And he was making the case while we were talking on the phone. I go, wait a minute, let's do this on the show so we can go from the beginning to the end with it, put the information out there, because it's one of those things that twist your mind. Like, I'm used to thinking this way. This is so different. And go through it all, put it together so that we could, I could at least be able to understand the whole vision that he has on it, as well as allowing you out there as the listeners to have this information and then act accordingly, however you feel, because I think the only thing we all can agree on is that there's some kind of crash coming. And many people have opted to believe that aliens will come and help us, or that Jesus will return, or the white hats of the Illuminati will knock out the bad guys. It's all this kind of, well, somebody will come in and help us mentality, which, in my own opinion, has been programmed into us so that we don't actually take an act as the giant masses that we are, that are funding the small little pyramid. The base moves, the top falls off the pyramid. And one of the ways to do that is to have us wait around for someone to come in and help us. Anyway, so the coming crash at some point is more and more people are taking notice that, things can't keep going this way. You can't keep punching out $80 billion a month into the economy and not have it do something. And where is that going? And how can we have trillions in debt? How is that possible? Where did it come from? How come these banks are black holes? I mean, people are just asking those questions, and there's no conventional answer. You can't just come up and say, well, blah, blah, blah. And so that in itself is having a waking up, shaking us. It's waking us up from our slumber. And so I asked Lionel if he would come on and talk about it. He will. He is. We are going to do this. There's no real time limit to this other than, what we do here. One of the benefits of not having it crammed into a live situation, so we can develop these items in its... and if since this is recording, it's a hard time for people to interact with it. If you do have questions, please send them an email. I will forward them to Lionel, and we'll have him back to deal with these things, because it's very important to have the give and take. You guys are going to think of questions I don't, though I really try to think, because you guys, I'm really one of you guys, only I'm sitting up here in the mic. That's what the whole point of the show is. I'm just like a listener who decided to, facilitate all of us to be able to access guests with their information. And so, but to do that, write email, f2f at innersights.com. You can just go to the webpage. There's all kinds of ways you can send it. And then we will arrange for extra discussion on this at another time. So Lionel Parkinson, again, he's the author of The Holy Virus. I highly, highly, highly recommend people read that. It's a paradigm-busting book that will set you free. The truth will really set you free, because the illusion is based on fear, and the truth, even in these times, economic truths, will give you an empowered way to get through things. And fear, the opposite of fear is light, and opening, and information, and action. Fear debilitates and causes inaction. And okay, so with that said, let me bring on Lionel Parkinson, and thank you, Lionel, for being here.
Hey, it's great to be on this program again. It's been a while. What a great introduction. You covered a lot. It almost sounded like the whole program itself.
Well, I thought since we did talk a little bit, I wanted to get some kind of a overview there, throw it out there, and then we can start back, say, at square one and fill in the details, and then go farther than that, because we never really finished when we were talking. I said, we really should do this as a show. And I like that I'm going along with this so that I can hopefully ask the questions that would be asked by listeners. So I mentioned when I talked to you that Webster Tarpley is one of the only guys other than yourself who is actually saying that danger is not in inflation, not that inflation is good, but the real danger is deflation, and cited in Germany when Hitler actually took power, it was during the deflationary stage, which was utterly devastating to the already beat-up, inflated economy. And the one thing that I never understood is, well, how does the dollar deflate once you've made so many of them. If you print so much money and then you deflate it, well, then people should have more money because they got more, they got deflated, they got actual paper that's worth more per paper than it was before. But we'll get to that. You explained how that works out. But perhaps if you could kind of walk us through, I mean, you've done this over the years, and you've put together this view, this world view on this, and if you could kind of walk us through it, you would be doing thousands and thousands of people a valuable service.
Yeah, I'll try and do my best. The time eras, going back to like the Great Depression eras, when we had there was a lot going on. Back then, you literally had the gold and silver standard money, and you literally had the definition of money traveling through economies. Unlike today, what you have is nothing more than debt being printed out and digitalized into the society. So back then, what caused the great inflation of the stock market and then the crash, the great deflation of the stock market was one thing, and that was leverage. People gambled more money than what they originally had placed their bets on. It was usually 10 to 1 leverage. They were allowed to bet far more money than what they actually had in their pockets to bet. When the game finally ended, the deflation of the stock market from about 387 down to just a few bucks in the October crash of 1929, that deflation of money never really existed because they never really had the money in the first place to bet it. So the underlying amount of money that was really being bet, maybe just $1, but yet there was 9 more being bet that was never in existence, was allowed to be a future bet that could never be covered. This was a tactic that was used to get as many suckers into the game and steal the underlying money that they did have. And this is what causes crashes. Today, however, it's done on a same principle. History is repeating itself, but it's now on a far more advanced scale where you have all these little different techniques that are being used. We're no longer under the gold and silver standard monetary system. Nothing is being backed by anything anymore. So that's just a little history lesson on what happened back then. The same thing is happening today, but it's a lot more complicated to get into. Money today is not real money. It is just digitalized. So the best you can do is get the paper money out of the banks, $100 bills, $50 bills, and that is probably that is what you're going to have to call as your base money.
All right, let's stop there for 1 second. I'm going to pop in as I get questions in my head, and I want to get in before I lose the spot in there. You said real money, and in essence, digital money, as if they were, digital's not real and real is. Could you explain the difference between the two? Okay. Especially in the light of which makes one real and one not.
Okay. Let's cover a digital money scenario. Let's say in the case of a couple going to the bank and wanting to get a $200,000 loan. Okay, the bank today will require a deposit of $10,000 or $20,000. The bank really doesn't have $200,000 to give that couple, but they'll create it out of thin air, much the same way the Federal Reserve does. And
in the case of the bank, they call it, they're making this loan real based on your promise to pay. So when you pay back your loan, that money will actually become real because you have worked every day, built buildings or whatever people do for a living, and you've taken your sweat and converted it into actual money. You pay the bank back. At the end of your loan, that 200,000 you actually made into existence, and then of course you pay extra because interest. So you bring in, say, $300,000 of real money at that point, correct?
Yeah, that $200,000 is digital money. This is the reason why banks will never give you a loan on the house in the form of $100 bills. If you was to ask them for it in the form of $100 bills, they will refuse to give it to you because they don't have it in the first place.
Okay. So let's stop there for a second. The real money that I just created by paying back the loan on my house, which I'm actually getting, I mean, I could literally go to the bank and cash my check and get it in cash, go to the other bank and pay my mortgage. So that part would be real as long as I actually have it in my hand. But what happens after I pay them? They turn around and loan that out, again, creating even more unreal money. Would that be the simple way to look at it?
Well, yeah, we're just talking about the initial loan stage here,
okay.
How they create digital money versus the $10,000 deposit of real physical money that you gave them as a deposit on the home.
Okay.
I'm just trying to establish the difference between the artificial digital money that never really existed on the bank ends as far as the loan, because they really don't have that money.
Okay.
They never did. So all that money that is being loaned out to the borrower over a period of 20 years or 30-year loan, whatever the contract is stating, the bank is betting that that person is going to maintain their job and slowly pay back that $200,000 over those many, many decades. Okay, even though the bank secretly knows they never really gave them anything, they just made a ledger book entry and applied a whole bunch of debt on the poor borrower. That's what took place. But that, nonetheless, becomes the digitalized money that never really existed in the first place. So, from that point on, the bank, the way they conduct their affairs today, because the interest rates are so low, they can't make money off the borrower anymore at this 3 or 4%. So they take the $10,000 deposit from the real money, underlying money, and then they gamble with that in what they call a shadow banking industry casino, and they will leverage it anywhere from 40 to 100 times and make their bets in commodities. They'll do it in oil, currencies, gold, silver, whatever they choose. So that $10,000 is leveraged out, let's say 100 times, which creates $1 million bet. So now the bank is on the hook for the $1 million that they're betting on, plus the $200,000 that they're betting that the home borrower can pay off over a period of 20 or 30 years based on the contract. So there's altogether you got $1,200,000 bet that the bank is betting on, when the only underlying real money that has been shown physically is simply a $10,000 deposit from the original borrower.
Okay, and that actually answers a question that I was going to bring up along the way was, well, say they lose that bet, and then somebody is going to get $1 million out of this. So I said, well, but actually they don't have $1 million because they have this digital money which doesn't really exist anyway.
Right.
On the other end, right?
This is the problem with the banks around the world, and they're being caught with enormous bank losses. These figures have gone as high as $1 quadrillion as far as the so-called digital money out there that has been loaned out, gambled on, that is all this digital money that never existed in the first place because it was all leveraged. It never existed. So in theory, when, like back in the 29 crash, when they leveraged way beyond what they had originally had money to bet on, they couldn't push prices any higher, so everything came down really hard and fast, usually in a flash crash, which occurred back in October of 1929. This wiped out anybody in the stock market back then, but it took several years for the underlying economy to feel it. Nowadays, history is repeating itself, only in a sort of a twisted sort of manner, and this is where it becomes very difficult for even me to explain. But just imagine all this $1.2 million of digital money that's being created off this one borrower of this one home. The underlying money is only $10,000 in existence. That's the only money and it went into the hands of the bankers, and they lost not only the $10,000 deposit, but they lost on, let's say, that the borrower lost his job. He can't pay the mortgage anymore. Now the bank is on the hook of their balance sheet is now showing a $200,000 loss because the borrower lost his job. The banks are now on the hook for $1 million because they lost their money gambling in the commodities, because they can no longer make money off the borrower at 3 or 4% and pay their employees. This is the situation in banks today.
And think about it. That's only one bank and one individual who made that loan, and it had them stretch it out. Now we have to multiply that by millions of people, and then, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of banks. I don't know how many banks there are. And that number, that's how we get that quadrillion-dollar number.
And this is the reason why you see central banks like the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve Bank, the IMF, constantly in unison. These central banks have started a global round of quantum easing, which is another word for bailouts. Incredibly, markets again they're celebrating the fact that central banks are taking desperate action to try and stem the global slowdown, depression. They've even come out with statements such as unlimited funds. Central bankers do not offer the world's financial system unlimited funds because things are going well. It's just the opposite. There is no global recovery. The global slowdown is actually accelerating. The bailout money that you're hearing about over in Europe, and also the quantum easing 3 issue with the Fed in this country, that money that is going into Europe is not getting into the economy. It is not it is not creating inflation. It's going straight to the banks to shore up their balance sheet losses, such as the case that I just described on a mini scale with just one borrower of $200,000.
Okay, so let me recap this. You can see if I got it right, and hopefully then the listener will be following along, and they'll see. So this person puts the $10,000 in, and then they create $200,000, which is then leveraged to get the $1 million. Now this one is lost $1 million and $200,000 because the original guy lost his job. Times thousands of people doing this, times hundreds of thousands of banks. Now we're into quadrillions. So we get the bailouts, and you get the quantitative easing and so forth. That money goes in to fill the books up to account for that $1 million and that $200,000, correct? And then
yeah, that's right.
Right, and then what happens is, well, where does it come from? It comes. That's why the citizens of the United States, the citizens of Greece, all these other people, they're actually becoming the new promise to payers. They're the ones paying the tax on it that's going to make this good over a long period of time. And so that is the source of the value of that dollars that are being created, is this promise to pay by a nation of people working over 50 years or 100 years or whatever it is. Is that?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's they call it austerity over in Europe.
Right.
For America, austerity is going to begin on January 1st of next year. That's when they're going to start raising taxes. There's certain words, key phrases being used, such as fiscal cliff. But the reality is they're going to raise taxes. They're going to find any way to get your underlying real money to pay for all this digital losses that the banks have caused through their gambling, through their loaning out money that they never really had in the first place. And they've just created such a mess that even the central banks cannot cover their losses. So what they've been doing is just buying their time. They know they cannot fix the insolvency of banks around the world. They are dead broke. They will remain dead broke forever. There's just too much debt. There's not enough money, underlying real money, to cover their losses. And this is where it kind of becomes confusing. But on a bank level, they know they can't fix this problem.
Let me stop there for 1 second. So I want to go in and give another thing to make sure I'm understanding it, is that at this point you have say, I bet $1 million and lose. The guy who I owe $1 million to bets $1 million on something I may have, and he loses. So now we owe each other $1 million. And that $1 million doesn't exist, but we're depending on that $1 million in our bank's book. So this is where the credit swaps come in, where they end up paying, they'll take good debt and bad debt, make it into something and split it up and pay their debt with this and pay the other one's debt with that. So they're kind of paying each other's debt with these created units of debt. So it'd be like, you owe me $100, I'll pay you with $100 that someone else owes me, but then you owe them $100, and it's not even that even. Is that kind of how all of this money gets moved around? Is debt paying debt, which actually escalates it even farther?
Yeah, it really does get complicated when you look at it like that.
Well, I'm trying to make it simple, and that's why I don't want to use real money and actually try to come up with a balance sheet at the end, which would I think would confuse God. But I'm trying to put together a crude model to understand how this is even escalating more by all these people who are paying each other off with debt, which is the opposite of what we normally do. When you have dollar and you buy something, you're paying with a real value item for the real value item, or bartering. Let's say even bartering. If you give your time and effort and you get something for it, you milk a cow, you feed the cow, you get milk out of the cow. There's real tangible give and take here, but now we're coming up with all this fictional money. You're winning and losing fictional money, and now you're paying and winning and losing losses with even more fictional money.
Yeah, correct. It's the credit default swaps, in my mind, are nothing more than a clever way to try and pass the debt onto unsuspecting investors. They'll repackage investments in a way that they really don't explain, and they don't have much transparency. But it's a shell game trying to move that debt around from their hands into the hands of someone else. It's just like the austerity programs. It helps them steal underlying economic money and move that money back toward the banks to help shore up their balance sheets that will never be fixed and never be solvent.
Because I think one of the confusing items is when people owe a lot of money to somebody, you would think that there was goods or services that were provided that aren't paid for. But when you do gambling, think about it. You go to a casino, you bet on a roulette wheel, you put $100 on a roulette wheel, you lose, that money is gone. Well, now think about going into the bank, getting a loan, going into a roulette casino, getting a loan for the casino, putting that money on a number, it doesn't pay off, now you owe them more than what you borrowed, but no real value has exchanged there. It wasn't like you built a building and sold it, or whatever. You're putting your money on a number, you're spinning a wheel, and it doesn't work. There's no real actual value to gambling, and so when you now owe them this fictional number, I owe them $1 million. I borrowed $100,000 credit. Now I owe them $1 million. They never gave you the $100,000 to begin with, and now you owe them $1 million, and nothing was actual real in that. And this is what we're saying that's out here in the banking world, correct?
Yeah, the banks have just created so much more debt out of desperation that they cannot function as banks as they used to 60, 70 years ago, when they used to make loans out at 10%. When they're trying to make loans today at 3%, they can't survive. So it forced them into gambling, and that's what's changed their whole dynamics from a loaning institution to a gambling institution. They've gotten rid of their loan officers, pretty much, and now they're traders in the commodity markets.
And
this is what's going on.
And so now when they're getting people's money in the bank, or they're looking to loan for a house, in reality they're trying to get money so they can gamble to pay back the debts that they have. And of course they've realized that they can't do that. It's impossible at this point. It's not going to happen. The bad debt is too high, so now they have to get money elsewhere. Thus, we have the Federal Reserve, printing money, putting it on the backs of the countries that are by law made to pay this debt back, and that's what we're at this moment.
Yeah, the banks have pretty much are the gambling institutions. They are now gambling not only with that $10,000 deposit for that borrower on that one home, but they've taken it a step further. They are gambling with people's deposits, period. Whether or not you are asking for a loan or not, your checking account, your savings account, they are using everything every bit of money, real underlying money, to gamble with, so they can try and make a profit beyond what they could normally do at a 3 or 4% loan.
And it's funny. It's funny because like the Teamster Pension Fund got in trouble for doing that. And oh boy, you're taking the pension money and you're doing things with it, or you can't do that. Well, now the entire world, all the banks around the world are doing that.
So when they lose their bets, when these banks are losing big time, they now have to depend on the Federal Reserve in this country for their bailout. And this is where this quantum easing comes in. The quantum easing is nothing more than the Federal Reserve pumping digital money, not so much real money, because they can't really print that type of money and give it to the banks. They have to use digital money to pay off the digital debt that the banks are showing up on their balance sheets. This money is not inflationary, and this is where I part company with all these so-called people that think that we're going to start seeing gold shooting up to 5,000 or 10,000, and oil to, that the prices are really going to skyrocket to the point where nobody can pay for anything anymore. The truth of the matter is that the banks will take that money from the Fed. They don't make loans. They don't even expand the money supply by making leveraged loans. They keep the money themselves. They have to. They try and make their bankrupt balance sheets look whole for the short term. The problem is even the Fed doesn't have enough money to cover their losses. So all this quantitative easing is simply relieving their liquidity problems, but it cannot solve their insolvency problem. So eventually this will stop, and when it comes down, this is where deflation becomes a real problem in society, because the underlying real money, the paper money, doesn't really exist hardly at all. They might print only 0.5% of all the money in the world in actual printed money, and this is why I tell people to get their physical money out of the banks.
Okay, so let me stop there and recap a little bit to make sure I got it. And we're taking stair steps to this understanding. I'm getting everything, and correct me along the way so that in case I say. So at this point now, the money that's being given to the banks are being put on the balance books to try and make up for the, let's say, the savings or the pension funds or whatever that have been already lost. So if you go to the bank and say, I want all my money out, everybody did that, of course it wouldn't be enough. But it's not even, it's worse than that. Before they would have a good portion of it. Well, now they don't have any of it, or even worse, they don't. They're, of course, they're way in debt. So when they print this money, they're putting it in the bank account digitally to make up for the lost money of the so-called real money that was in there. And to further make it worse is that we're putting real money and we're changing it. We're putting in digital money in return. So if somebody wants to go in and take their money out, on the balance sheet, it would look like the money's there because the feds put that credit money, that digital money there. But in reality, there isn't real money there. So if people went to take their real money out, it's not there. So it's even more complicated. Somehow the American taxpayer owes trillions of dollars, and there's still no money there. Right?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. It's just the fact that these banks have great, big, huge black holes that suck up the money faster than even the Fed can give it to them. Bank losses are bigger than ever and growing in leaps and bounds. It's just a liquidity issue that they're trying to.
And the liquidity could be explained as the real money that people really put in there, that they could actually really do things with. And they're hoping to be able to keep enough of this digital money in there to have this liquidity. But in the real reality of it is, you don't even have the real money. The real liquidity is it's on paper and not in reality.
Yeah, and the banks are creating even a worser case scenario, and their losses are actually getting bigger than what the central banks can bail them out currently at. You know, you'll hear hundreds of billions of dollars going into, BCP will somehow come up with hundreds of billions of dollars for Spain or France or Portugal or Ireland and Greece. The truth is that they're on the hook for tens of trillions of losses over there that they'll never be able to cover. But that money is satisfying a liquidity issue. Otherwise, the whole economy was shut down over there. The banks would have to close, and everything would just be locked up. And this is what they were worried about back in 2008. And the same problem exists over here. The Fed really cannot cover the hundreds of trillions of dollars of losses that have been gambled away in bad loans and bad bets. It's way beyond their fix. When the Fed actually does give their money, it's just satisfying a liquidity problem. But the problems are getting bigger and bigger, and by this spring, they get just the down payments on some of these losses will mount into the tens of trillions, and I think this is when everything starts crashing down.
Right. So I think we all understand how we got to this point where that's why they owe so much money. It's because it was lost in gambling, which is not a real business transaction, and that's why you can lose. Like if you go gambling, you could lose all your money and actually build up credit, and even though there was no real event there. And so this has been taken from people who have gambling issues and the syndicate who ran gambling, whether it be a guy running numbers to the legitimate quote-unquote gambling houses. This has now become mainstream investments, as we've seen some of the Ponzi schemes have fell down in front of us. That's just the tip of the iceberg, that all these banking institutions now have legitimized illegitimate gambling. And that's why the numbers are so high. Because one of the things I couldn't understand is, how did the numbers get so high? I mean, there's got to be how much real, actual stuff going on can drive up the money that much. Somebody would have to have that money for someone to owe them that money. But when you're gambling, that's not the case. You can build up astronomical Google trillions, 100 trillion, quadrillion, Google trillion dollars in debt because it's all mathematically based on a gamble.
Yeah, if you take out all the leveraged money in the economies right now, your actual price of the Dow would actually be well under $1,000. The price of gold would be right back down to your $20 to $50 an ounce, and the price of oil would be right around $5 a barrel. It's because of all this leverage, what they call derivatives, futures, electronic trading funds, and all the little nasty tricks that they've created for the last, especially since 1985, because that's when all this stuff started coming back online again. The SEC originally was created, the Securities Exchange Commission was created back in the 30s to make sure that stuff would never happen, because they saw it occur with all this leverage betting on the stock market. They wanted to create the SEC so it would never come back online, but it did back in 1985, and that's when we saw all this leverage buying and futures, and then later on we got the electronic trading funds and all this digital money coming in. That was never really created for the economy in the first place. It was created for betting purposes, so people could make a lot more money a lot faster if you had the inside information. For those that didn't have the inside information, anybody that used leverage got wiped out really fast. And that's how this game is really played. And that, I know, when we come to the end game, all that leverage is sucked out and it deflates. And that's when you're going to see the price of gold really plummet. That's when you're going to start seeing the price of the Dow, the NASDAQ, the S&P. It's just like last Friday when you just saw just a small, tiny down move in the stock market. You would have noticed also a same percentage drop in gold and silver and oil. They all go up together, and they will all come down together because some of that digital money got sucked out.
Okay. The light bulb is going on. Because I, of course, I've been listening to the people talking about gold being this, holding value. But in reality, people are buying gold and buying oil and other commodities using the digital money, which doesn't exist. Just like the original scenario of them getting, the person puts in the 10,000, they create the 200,000, which creates the million. That million buys gold and oil, but when it comes time to actually pay for it, if you will, when the bottom is pulled out, you're not going to be able to buy the gold and oil, which means the people who have gold and oil are going, well, somebody's got to buy this stuff. It's worthless to me. I got to be able to sell it. Thus, the price comes down because nobody has real money to buy the real oil. They have digital money, which doesn't exist. Okay. The light bulbs are now. What about the person who actually physically has gold in their own possession? They're going to still have that problem because when the gold falls, because no one can have money to buy it, they're going, well, I got gold, but you don't have the money to buy it. Therefore, your own physical gold, even though you got it stored in a safe in your house, that will still go down as well.
Yeah, it will, because it's treated just like gold on electronic trading funds.
Okay, the light bulbs are going on because we stopped talking because I wanted to have the light bulb go on doing the show for the benefit of everybody else having the same light bulb action. It's the bottom line is it's the lack of dollars that really exist, and when they pull out all the phony stuff, no one's going to have money to buy anything. Therefore, the prices drop, and therefore the dollar itself, because of the dollar in relationship to commodities, will actually deflate or become more valuable because there's less of them to actually go out and buy real goods and services.
Right.
Okay.
The deflation of the digital money will occur, thereby exposing the fact that people really don't have paper dollars, and that's what drives down deflation on everything. There's a reason why I've been able to track $21 trillion outside the American banking industry, and it's all parked over in nice little safe offshore accounts that are not gambling with digital money. These people are waiting for the crash and waiting to come in with their digital money and buying people's homes, businesses, whatever they want. And that's the game right there. They know it's coming, but back to that whole definition of deflation. Once you suck the digital money out of the game, it leaves prices of gold, oil, silver, the Dow, everything comes down 95% in value, because it was all slowly pumping it up over the period of 1985 decades. Because back in 85, the Dow was right around 1,000. Our economy is not 13 times greater and bigger and stronger than it was back in 1985. It just simply got pumped up by all this digital derivative futures gambling money, and gold and silver simply rode the same game. You know, that oil, same thing. People are so used to $90 a barrel oil, they don't even think about it. But you go back to 85, you're looking at about a $5, $10 a barrel oil.
And so something like peak oil, people have claimed as to be some type of a means to keep the oil up high by having an alleged lack of supply. Thus, the price is somehow legitimized higher.
Yeah, and that's why it appears we've had inflation over, this 30, 35 years now, but people don't know how to shift their mind back into a deflationary world spiral. Therefore, they don't know what's going to trigger the opposite, and the next crash will be massive. It might come on slow, but it's more likely it will be another bank lockup, where credit just doesn't move around anymore. It might start over in Europe. It's most likely, I think if I had to nail down the most likely possibility, it would probably be in the spring of next year, when I see that they have to pony up tens of trillions of dollars instead of these hundreds of billions of dollars.
Mm-hmm.
I think that pretty much ends the game for them. That locks up their banking industry over there, which locks up ours over here. People are forced with probably withdrawal limits out of their banks. They won't get access. The FDIC is dead broke. It has been since 2009. So that so-called guarantee to that insurance to cover your $100,000 in your bank account goes away really fast when the insurance has already been broke for years now. So I really don't trust the banks. They are gambling institutions. They are not loaning institutions. My advice is to get your physical money out from underneath their control and get it under your control, where you can see it and feel it in your hands. Do not trust gold and silver. It will crash right along with the stock market. These criminals are going to short these markets at the time that they feel they are at their highest. You're looking at, back in the year 2000, 2001, I bought a lot of gold and silver, but I bought it at a time that I felt was a safe price, when it was around $300 an ounce. And silver was right around $5 an ounce. I had no problems back then. I kept on telling people to buy it back then. I knew it was a safe investment. I even sold my home and invested in it, in a lot of it back then. And so I know what it's like to ride these waves over a period of decades and watch them manifest themselves. But I saw, at least 3 years ago, a turn, a major turn, and I saw that we are now in a massive deflationary spiral to the ground.
But the deflation is hidden because it's propped up by digital money, which is an illusion.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
Correct. And once the banks lock up, this will reveal the digital losses for what they really are, and the central bank liquidity that's going in right now around the world to hide this problem will come to an end, and that's where things really get nasty really fast, and people will not get access. The price of gold will plummet. The price of oil will plummet. I don't care if there is a war over in Iran that might give you a quick little spike, but it will plummet, and it'll be like the 1930s all over again.
Well, actually, times many times, because you have it. Yeah. The way I can see it is because of the digital fictional money, the rise has been way higher, so therefore the fall will be much harder, because you're going from a higher to a lower in a faster, more shocking rate. I mean, you could fall off a ledge and dust yourself off and pick yourself up, but fall off a 10-story building, you got some damage to deal with.
Yeah, this is how massive this whole problem is. I'll just kind of briefly describe what relationship the banks have with the Fed really quick. So I know I just kind of covered over it a little bit, but banks worldwide are saddled with vast real estate losses. And here's the clever and stealth way that central bankers are using to funnel vastly more bailout money to the banks. Incredibly, the banks are now able to pledge their wiped out mortgage paper directly to the Fed and borrow against it. Now, this new quantum easing 3 that they just recently announced by the Fed will buy up their mortgage-backed securities of U.S. banks and foreign correspondents. This paper is worth a teeny fraction of what it was issued at. The soaring defaults and foreclosures mean the value of these mortgage-backed securities keeps plunging lower and lower. This is what's going on behind the scenes right now. But the problem is the losses are just getting too big, and eventually even the Fed will run out of time. And this whole thing, it's hard to pinpoint when, but I think it will occur in the spring of over in Europe, right around that March and April time frame, when they have to pony up tens of trillions based on the massive amounts of debts that they have to come up with to keep their banks liquid. At the same time, France is going to be they'll have to come up. They'll have to go to the banks for money. At the same time, Spain, Italy, all of them will have to come up with far more money and pony up to the ECB. It's just
I don't know what your feelings are about Max Kaiser, but that's the time frame he's talking about the crash as well. He's gone on a line to put his professional name on the line, and he's not falling out no stop, saying that he put the arbitrary date April 15th, I guess because it's the tax day. It's a nice round number, so to speak. So there's a case where someone is saying, I don't know, I've never heard him articulate as you are about the deflationary reality of the world, but nonetheless, it's probably
if they don't come up with that massive amount of money for all those countries again, they'll simply all default at the same time, and that will lock up the banks. I know it comes in the spring. These payments have to come twice a year, usually at the July 1st and also at the end of the year. But they always allow a little bit of leeway, like a month or two, for them to come up with this money. But it's not hundreds of billions this time. It really, all these countries will have to come up with literally tens of trillions. And I think it's way beyond what the ECB can come up with, or even if the Fed helped them, it's just not going to work.
And also they're still paying this in digital money. So in reality, if they make these payments, they're still paying them with phony money.
Yeah, but the Fed remember, they're buying all that bad mortgage paper, and they don't want to go totally bust themselves. So they are willing to pony up, maybe 40, 60 billion a month to give these banks liquidity, but ultimately they don't want to be saddled with a $500 quadrillion dollars losses of bad paper. This is just to buy time for themselves to move their personal money offshore out of the banks that are already debt broke, because they are right now. They're just living off of liquidity money. Their insolvency is sure and final. It's like a plane hitting a mountain. The occupants of the plane just don't realize they're dead yet, and the occupants of the banks are the depositors. They don't realize they can't get their money out. Well, not all of it. Only the smart ones can get their cash out before the plane hit. And the problem is the plane's already hit, and everybody on board is dead. It's kind of like the crash has already occurred right now. It's just that the central banks are providing just enough liquidity to keep the bank doors open. And it's through counting fraud that the truth hasn't hit the masses yet. They don't want to tell everybody around the world that they've already lost their money through all this digital gambling. So the underlying paper money, whoever gets their money out of the banks now, will be the smart people that will have the buying power of at least 10 to 1. Your $1 will be worth at least 10. In the crash, it'll probably be worth a lot more than that, but I'm just using that as
right.
An example. So my advice is don't trust gold, don't trust silver. If you're going to buy it, wait until after everything crashes, then you can buy it again. But the game is pretty much over for our generation and society. When things come down, they will stay down for the next 30 years. So don't expect this roller coaster ride anymore. This is the last hurrah, the last curtain call. This is it. You either get your money out of your banks and hunker down. And I'm not against getting food or ammunition like these other people, but if you have the money, you'll be able to pay for these things. And that's my best advice to people. Don't trust those that tell you that gold is going to go to skyrocketing prices. These criminal bankers are not interested in destroying their own power base. But there is a lot of deception. There is a lot of manipulation on the TV to get you to try and buy gold right now. And this is typical of tops of markets. And just if no one believes what I've said so far, all you have to do is watch the next time the Dow takes a significant plunge. Take a look at your gold and silver. Watch and see if it goes the opposite direction or not. These commodities always follow the markets. They all go up together and they all come down together. We had it just four years ago when the stock market came down from 14,300 down to 6,700. You had gold and silver plummet, especially silver, because it went from about $49 down to about $8. This is typical. You had oil go from 147 dollars a barrel down to 35. You know, this was the same kind of rhetoric back then, was that we were running out of oil. You know, it's always, they know how to work the masses, use the media, get them to invest their money in highly leveraged instruments, and they get sucked into these crashes. The next one is the biggest and the final one, and that's my warning for the last couple of years. Get your money out of the banks and hunker down, because try and hold on to that job if you can.
Now, so the first time you mentioned this to me was a year or two ago. It's hard to tell. Time is so fast, but so if somebody didn't then and did it now, they would have made a few $100 more, maybe $500 more an ounce. Okay, fine, all right. So they, but it's like okay, do you want to risk? Maybe I'll make another 100, or maybe it'll come before you get the money out, So it's like for those who didn't listen before, they may have the illusion that they made a little money, but they were also risking it crashing before then. And it almost did. There are a couple of times I've heard the stories that did have come out, even through the mainstream, of how we were, inches away from a world crash, but something figured it out, blah, 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 and they made it through again. So the option now is this logic is very good. It makes a lot of sense. It's on. You can even test it by watching the relationship with the stock market and gold. But if you want to wait, well, maybe I can make a little bit more. Maybe it'll go up to 2,000 before it crashes. Maybe it will. But now you're risking whatever money you may have in hoping to gain a little more. And that question is going to be: would you rather be safe or sorry? I guess would be the two options. So I mean that's what's nice about what you're saying. You're saying, look, I don't really know absolutely time frames. There may be a few weeks here and there, or a few months here and there, but when you look forward. And people are also saying this. I mentioned Kaiser, and then as you go forward, you do see that at some point the numbers are going to be so high. And I use a personal example of a company I work for, Fannie Mae Candies. It was a very no debt whatsoever. Was bought by a company who leveraged buying it from the owners, and they bought other companies which they leveraged on top of the other ones, and so forth. The whole thing finally fell down. But what was interesting to me was the last, say, year of his life is that they kept pushing forward the debt to the next quarter. Meanwhile, in that quarter, the people who owned and ran the company were taking their bonuses, were making a lot of money. They even got to the point where they shut down production to keep expenses down so that they can get their bonus, which is, of course, going to aid in killing the company. But they kept doing it, knowing it was going to crash eventually. It was just when. Can we get another quarter out of it? Okay, good. Pull money out. And then finally it crashed, and that was the end. And I look at that as a micro example of the macro, is that can we push it off a little more, get more money out, because the people who have the more money at the end think that they'll be doing the best at going through an inflationary crunch. For example, if dollar goes from $100 to $1, and I got trillions of them, I now got hundreds of trillion. The problem is, and what you're bringing up, is that digital money will become worthless, so that you may have $1 billion in digital money hidden somewhere offshore, but no one wants digital money. They want the real money, and therefore you'll have a lot of nothing. Is that correct, looking at it?
It's debatable whether those that have parked their money offshore is really safe or not, because it doesn't really exist anyway, and it's pretty much money that nobody could actually pay them. What they're hoping for is that if it's not tied to the banks that are on the hook for hundreds of trillions of losses, they're hoping that money isn't going to disappear somehow. I can't really explain whether or not they're going to be able to hold on to that. All I know is that money that has been leveraged out there really doesn't exist at all. The only money that you can really count on are the U.S. Treasuries which is not gambled. This is why the major players know what's coming. They are buying themselves protection. U.S. government securities is in massive amounts. That's why they're buying it. They are also making desperate trades that can give them the most cash flow in the shortest time possible. But this money that they have parked offshore, I don't know if they're going to be able to hold on to it. The small guy over here that's stuck, using their banks, trying to make their buying and selling transactions, is just wise to get the paper money out, because that is the money you're going to be, that's your real wealth. That's what you can count on. That's what you have worked for all your life, or up till now.
Okay, now I'm going to come up with some scenarios that are perhaps not ethical, but I'm wondering how they might work, and somebody might be thinking about it. What if people started to drive up, say, their credit card, saving their real money in a mattress, so to speak, and buy things on a credit card, knowing that the whole thing's going to fall down? Where will that person be at the fall with, say, if they have a $15,000 Visa bill? They got 15 grand in their mattress, and they owe 15,000 on a Visa bill. How will they fare going through this?
Well, since it's not tied to a house, they'll be held still liable for that debt, even though they can't pay it back.
So in inflation, in the deflationary, their 15,000 will actually be 10 times more actual real money.
Yeah, it would be impossible for them to pay it back anyway, but the debt will still be on them and probably their children after them. Whereas most people can still walk away from a home. And even in those cases, I think they can still come after a person. But that's why the home ownership is a nightmare, because that's another thing that will crash another 90% when this whole thing comes down. Homes, commodities, stock market, you don't want to be in these things. I know that what I'm saying is really going to piss off a lot of people out there, but that's the reality. This is what happened just 4 years ago. If housing went down in the last crash and all this liquidity was pumped out in the last 4 years to keep things going until the next crash, then it doesn't take much of a intelligent individual to know that in the next crash, the housing will go down just along with everything else. That's the way this game has been played for the last 30 years. People don't know how to shift from an inflationary spiral to a deflationary debt spiral. You have to get out of all debt. And that's why it's important to look at this for what it really is. The world is going into a deflationary death spiral. There's nothing that's going to stop it. No central bank, no amount of central banks is going to stop it. They've only been able to slow it down with bailouts.
And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, a lot of the people who are advocating storing food, in one way, that's still a good idea because you have to eat. And if you're not working because your business went out of business and you don't have a money flow, well, you got to have food, okay? But it almost seems like if you can get your hands on real money as much as you can and sit on it as you go through this, and especially on the other side, those who have actual real cash dollars will actually do well in this.
Yeah, just like the Great Depression. If you ask anybody that went through the Great Depression, the price of everything was practically nothing. But the problem is nobody had any money to buy it with. That's what they'll tell you.
Now, the next question I want to ask... Go ahead.
I was just going to finish the point that those that did have the physical money were able to buy whatever they wanted. They could still get their homes. They could still get their cars, their food, and everything. It's just that back then, deflation hit the economy. And because the reason why deflation hit the economy is because all the leveraged money disappeared. Nobody could pay nobody could pay it off. There was just a few people that knew how to short the market back in 1929, that actually survived and made money during that crash. The rest lost everything because they'd leveraged far more than what they had originally to bet with. And because they lost their money, the underlying economy went in the tank. And that's deflation. And that's what happened back then, and history will repeat itself, but only on a more massive scale. Back in the 20s, only 5% of the people invested in the stock market. Now you have well over 40%.
Okay, so let me ask the last question that I have, and then we can still banter around, but I have a bunch of, like blank lines I need to fill in. So what makes the dollar, why not have barter, or why not have some other vehicle of value come up in its place? Why would the dollar still be viable at this point? The physical dollar I'm talking about, the actual one you have in your hand. Why would people even give that the time of day at this point after being burned so bad, and not move on to some other way, like physical gold or barter? You know, I cut your lawn, you fix my plumbing or whatever.
Right. The reason why I know that this country won't go off the dollar standard is simply this: the government won't allow them. I mean, if you try and open a business, and well, it's been tried here in the state of Idaho. I've seen businesses try and create the silver coins and start an economy based on that, and the feds move in and persecute them, charge them with crimes and all this kind of stuff, and threaten to put them in jail and prison. It's because they're trying to go back to their constitutional money, but the feds will not allow them to do that. It doesn't matter whether they used any type of barter system. This government will not allow you to do it. That's why I know they'll come in with their muscle and move them out. That's just the way it is.
What about changing? What about the feds printing a new type of money and having everybody turn in the old ones to try and get the old dollars out of circulation? Sort of like the silver certificates. They printed the new money, and now you only got so long before this other money's not worth anything, to try and weed out anybody hoarding.
Well, they do that just about every 5 years. They add different security measures, but ultimately it's still called the dollar, and it might look a little different, but it will be called the same, and I don't rule out the fact that they might want to pull in all the old money and replace it with the new. It's just that this is the best way to handle the situation. Take your money out of the banks right now, and
of course, if they did that, where they come up with a new dollar, it still would be worth $1. I mean, if they changed the value of it, I mean, say they made the new dollar worth 1/10 of the old dollar, I mean, you would still get the same amount of credit. So it's kind of like you'd be getting whatever the new value is, you'd still be getting the equal amount.
Yeah, you just swap it out, the old for the new. I'm sure they'll take your old ones and give you the new ones. I don't see much of an issue there. The game is to get as much of underlying hard-worked economic dollars into their hands, and they've used the digital money to suck people in, because people by nature are greedy and they think they can make a lot more money by betting than they can by going out and working.
Right. Well, let me, as I ponder this, what if they decide to go to a digital money as a standard and require everybody to turn in their physical money to get a credit card like credit account, and that at some point the physical money will won't be accepted in a legal sense, that is. like illegally they say, okay, we're going to go to digital money, and you got to turn in your physical dollars, or they won't be. Or at this point, it'll be legal to use them. What about something like that happening as in trying to battle this upcoming problem?
At that point, I think crash would already have occurred, and in that case, you can still trade it in and get the digital money, and the bank should be up and running. You know, I mean, you're still going to have the same amount of money. It's just it'll be in the digital form, but it won't be. It'll be hopefully in a bank that doesn't suck it into the black hole. At one point or time in the crash, these banks have to reset. That means they have to start back at zero. That means they have to realize all this debt cannot be paid off. So, and once they realize they can't bail them out anymore, they are forced to reset. At that point, they'll be safe again, and they'll just be taken over by smarter banks that won't be gambling, and they won't be. They'll raise interest rates and go back to loaning out to what few people have money left, that can legitimately buy a home and pay. In other words, we're at the end game, unfortunately, and in the history of this country, this is the biggest. This is going to be the biggest run up in money, and it's going to be the biggest crash because 99% of the money out there is all digital, and it's all gambled, leveraged money. It was never worked into the economy. Everybody's out there gambling on one level or another. And if you have money in the bank, even though you're not gambling it, your bank is gambling with your hard-earned money. So why not just get out of the gambling casino and get the money under your control and hide it the best way you know how? It's already been gone. It's already been gambled. They've lost far more money than they'll ever be able to collect from any central bank to bail them out. And that's where we're at right now.
And unfortunately, the people who owe, say, they owe $10,000 in consumer credit, they won't be given that same grace that the banks will, as far as not owing the money anymore.
No, the debt will still apply to them for the rest of their lives. Now they might come up with some kind of thing instead of owing $50,000. We'll lower it down to $10,000. Well, they still won't be able to pay that, but they'll try and provide ways for people to get out. But whether they do or not is up to them. But the banks will eventually have to reset, just like they always did back in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. And the same thing over in Europe and around the world. It will actually be a good thing for them to reset because it will force things to go back to business as usual, and it will force banks to be honest again if they could ever be honest in the first place. But this is of course just speculation on my part. We don't know if this goes into a real ugly dark age for the next 100 years too. So I would think that they would just reset and people would start over again. Unfortunately, the middle class will be wiped out at that point because they've got their money in the stock market, they've got it in the banks, they've got it in their pensions, they've got it. Half this country doesn't work anymore, and the manufacturing base is over in a slave camp called China. Any depression that we go into now will not help this. This country can't get back on its feet because there is no manufacturing base in existence over here like it did back in the 40s where we made everything.
And the manufacturing being that you're creating a real item that people then buy. I mean, what our economy has turned into is shuffling paper and making these types of investments with fake money. That's become the economy. The actual real,
Right.
the real creative stuff has now been moved off to other countries.
Yeah, because the problems that this country are facing right now is vastly more difficult than back in the 1930s. They had a hard time trying to get anything built back then, but at least they had the capability of manufacturing and building. Over here, it all went offshore. It's you can't paint a worser case scenario for the next crash for this country than what it's going to be facing here very shortly. That's why it's best to get out of the casino and again, that is the stock market, that is the commodity markets, that is housing, that is collectibles. If you notice that it is harder to sell expensive items on eBay now as opposed to 5 years ago.
Oh yeah,
people had.
I mean, I have people who are in that business. That one in particular has literally walked away from trying to sell the items. He's got a basement full of collectibles, and he just can't sell them. I mean, people realize that I can't risk spending this kind of good money on frivolous items because I can't survive. I'm having a hard time survive, and as it works its way through the economy, which a lot of stuff in the American economy is frivolous. When people get caught up in that, they're going to realize, look, I gotta like eat, stuff like that, and that'll of course start crashing the economy along those lines as well.
Yeah, the underlying handouts that this country's had for the last 4 years, such as unemployment checks, disappear on January 1st. They no longer get that 99 weeks. It drops down to, I believe, 39 weeks, if not shorter. That cuts off a lot of people really fast. Social Security percentage of money being taken out of their checks goes up. Taxes go up. America, like it or not, their austerity program begins on January 1st. The underlying economy is going to lose at least 5 to 10% of its GDP. This going into spring with Europe blowing up, I think, is the final straw, and that's where I think you start seeing your gold, silver, commodities, oil, stock market really getting hammered. That's just speculation on my part, but I'm looking at the facts based on the political events coming up, and I don't see how you can keep on pushing prices up anymore when the money from the government is actually deflating. It's not going to go out in the form of unemployment checks anymore. More restrictions on food cards, higher taxes. They're going to be sucking money out of people, not giving it back. And this, to me, spells austerity for this country. Same thing that Europe has been going through for the last couple of years. So this means a death knell to the banks because they're not going to be backed up by the Fed when the Fed realizes that they don't have enough money anymore. This really doesn't look good, does it?
No, it doesn't. But you know what? This is one of the reasons why, besides wanting to understand, I mean, I want to know what reality is. When the 2x4 is on its way to my head, I want to know the reality of it so that perhaps I could escape the blow, lessen the blow. But there are people who just don't want to know. Just let the 2x4 hit me in the head, and that's it. I'm not one of those. So I wanted to understand what you were saying. But what you have offered along the way, which I kind of knew, which is that you offered what people can do about it. I tell you, Lionel, I am so tired of listening to alternative radio and everyone talking about what is wrong and no one offering solutions. I mean, I've had guests on, something like Matt Stein, for example. I've had him on several times. He's been on other shows, and he offers, his book is called When Technology Fails. And he's got another one, When Disaster Strikes. He talks about how you can do things to get through this situation. How you can literally build your own solar house to how to cook and store food. That's a real thing that you could use. That's a solution, right? People talking about a crash coming. That's what I like to hear. And it's very rare to hear them on these other shows. They want to scare you half to death, so you turn in the next day. It's almost like people watching in a car wreck. They got to stop and slow down and see if they could see anybody's body parts. They wouldn't want to normally see those, but they're compelled by the energy at the moment. And a lot of people listen to shows because they just, another bad thing. Another bad thing. Well, I want to know the bad stuff, but more importantly, I want to know the solutions. And what you have showed us today is you have laid out why we're in the mess we're in. Very nice terms. And I kept on interrupting you to make sure I understood. So I hope that was actually a good thing instead of disruptive. Yeah. And you've also given us what we can do. And what we can do is store real physical dollars, just like they did back in the crash of the old. History does repeat itself. It may be bigger this time. It may have a larger number and a worldwide implication. But we can do things by storing physical dollars, for example, and perhaps some of those commodities, which at least at first might be in short supply, because especially in the cities, you have, anywhere from 1 day to 2 weeks worth of supplies, and they have to be brought in again. But the idea being is that if you have the dollar bill, which will be the arbitrarily law-enforced way to do currency, that will be the way to get through it, and those can actually prosper it. That kind of sounds bad, but you can actually prosper through getting through this by having physical dollars.
Yeah, that is my only solution for the listener. And 10 years ago, my solution was to buy gold and silver. I adamantly told people to buy it, but now it's a sell. It is not a buy. They should run from it. And boy, do they have the opportunity to run from it at a high price. I had no idea they could run the price of gold up this high. But they did, and they were able to do it with ETFs. And I remember doing a program on ETFs, on gold ETFs, and why those are going to be really devastating on people in the future. But yeah, gold and is a definite sell. It is not a buy. And the commercials on TV are not going to tell you this. Everything is going to go against what I'm telling the listener. And but I'm very well versed in this area of gold and silver. I've made a nice fortune at it, but I know it's at a top of a market. It is not at the bottom. So,
and it reminds me of those who are familiar with Seinfeld, which actually I've only seen in the last year. I've watched TV for 10 years, so I missed all of that. But in watching a couple of these episodes, one of them's Kramer got a thrill out of watching the gas gauge go close. How close can you get to empty without it actually stalling out? Was the thrill. And I think that's an analogy to people who have gold now. How high can it get, before it stalls out? And in the case of this, at least if you get out now, especially if you've got in a while ago, you'll make some real dollars, which you can then turn around and save, keep. But if you wait too far, then you'll be, it's starting to fall, I better sell. Well, then it might crash hundreds and hundreds or $1,000 a day, whatever. I don't know what kind of phony brake systems they have, on it. But
the nice thing about in the next crash that commodities will come down 90% and your dollar will go up 10 times fold. So kind of look at it this way, that a $100,000 home will go down to a $10,000 home, but your $100,000 cash will be worth $1 million. So it really will benefit you in more ways than one. $100,000 will be like $1 million back in the 1930s.
And it's funny because another validation, what you're saying, is how the mainstream in particular, but even in the alternative, overwhelmingly, they're saying the opposite. And that's what you would need to keep the illusion going, is the majority going along with the illusion. It's almost like if you want to find out truth, find out what the current belief is and invert it. You know?
Yeah, it's their job to get people to continue buying homes thinking that they're going to go up in value, and buy cars and buy this and buy that. But in reality, the price of everything is actually coming down, even though slowly right now. But there is a date with destiny, and I think it will be by springtime, but I could be wrong. That's just speculation on my part. But I base that on some pretty good solid data. But who knows? I could be wrong. But if it's not in the spring, it'll be sometime after that. So I think the solution is very clear, and it's one that I'm taking for myself. So I have no problem making this decision for myself. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be able to explain in full why I believe that deflation is the real culprit in the future and not inflation.
Well, I appreciate you actually. I mean, you're not getting any benefit of this. I mean, you're not going to provide some fund so people can escape the crash. You're not looking to. You're just sitting there. Look, I figured this out. I've done it for myself, and I want to offer it to people so that they can help themselves through this. So you're giving of this information without strings, without an agenda, and I appreciate you for doing that. A lot of people wouldn't do that, or they would create some type of marketable, sellable item to take advantage of this. And yet you've decided simply just to share freely this information that has taken you, a lifetime or maybe decades to learn and understand. And I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us.
Yeah, and they can test my theory out. Just watch the Dow. If it takes a significant dump on, let's say, Monday or Tuesday or something, if it continues dropping, just keep an eye on gold and silver. See if it follows. Watch oil with the same thing. You'll notice that these markets are, over the past decades, are all moving up together, and as they come down, they all come down together. The future crash is not going to be any different. Mm-hmm. So if they want to test my theory, just kind of watch that. You'll know that if it comes down with the Dow on a small percentage basis, what is it going to do on a large percentage basis when the Dow starts losing thousands of points? You're going to start seeing gold coming down hundreds and hundreds of dollars in relative percentage points. So all they have to do is test that theory of mine. Keep it, that way they'll know when the day of destiny hits what direction gold is really going to take.
So in like a recap, number one thing would be get out of consumer debt. Number two would be to save physical dollars, actual dollar bills, 10, 20s, the dollars in your hand. And three would be don't buy houses, don't buy credit items. What about a person who owns their own house? Are they still in danger based on taxes and whatnot?
Well, that's the only issue, is the property tax, but that's okay. You got to live somewhere.
Right.
I used to own a home outright, but at the year 2000, I decided to sell it and buy gold and silver back then. So I knew the timing was right, but no, you got to live there. If you own it outright, hey, that's a good position to be in.
And if you don't own it, like in my case, I don't, but I can always walk away from it since the debt is tied to the land. So worst case scenario, I could, go in with someone else somewhere else. So it's not. But if you have consumer debt, that is people are going to be looking at that as bleeding you to get some equity out of you to try and help their situation. So the owner of the house will take the house, but he knows the housing market is a bust. So I'll take the house, and at least I got something here. Maybe I can. He'll probably turn around and take it from me and rent it back to me. That's going to be the only value it would have to him or whoever owns it, would be the ability to perhaps turn it into an income maker, because it won't be able to be sold. That's for sure.
These banks do not want to foreclose on all these homes right away, because that would even show more massive losses on their balance sheets. So they're allowing people to stay in their homes without having them to pay on their mortgage for up to 2 years. So you might want to keep that in mind.
I'd hate to have to, but I'm going to have to. Well, Lionel, again, I thanked you for your work on your book, The Holy Virus, which I can't stress enough that people need to read for those who are into understanding Christianity and the real message of Jesus versus what the church is saying and why it's saying and where it came from. I can't stress that enough. It's been a life-changing, freedom-making event for me. And if you did that and nothing else, I would be eternally grateful. But to come out also in this information, this could actually save the difference between people, being saved and being decimated. And I just wonder how many people who hear this message will, sometime in the future, sit back and literally owe their ability to function financially to your message here. So I really thank your contribution to humanity. It sounds big, but it's true. This is the real kind of stuff we need, not the charismatic fluff and fear-mongering. So again, I thank you very much for offering this information.
Great, yeah. Well, now they know the solution and how to test that solution in the short term, and to see whether I'm right or wrong. That gives them a great opportunity. Gives the listener a great opportunity to find out right now whether I'm right or wrong.
Retell your timeless truths. Oh, it's your word.
Feet to Fire is a production of IPS Media Works on the OnSig Radio network of stations.